Okay, welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the source material you send us, the articles, the research, the often surprising notes, and we turn them into synthesized, cohesive knowledge. We're here to give you that shortcut to being thoroughly well-informed, diving past the headlines and into, well, the architecture of the ideas themselves. And today, we are embarking on a mission that is beautifully, fundamentally different from our usual deep dives. We're not talking about optimization or rapid change.
Not at all.
We are exploring the structure of strength itself.
Yeah.
Specifically, the kind that is silent, sustained, and deeply ordinary. Your source material calls it the architecture of quiet endurance.
And that phrase, quiet endurance, is so key. The sources we're analyzing, which are these excerpts from an observational conversation on this very topic, they explicitly set a unique constraint for us. This deep dive is designed to be, well, observational, grounded, steady, and fundamentally understated.
Right.
We are not here to sell a solution or offer some kind of motivational blueprint.
Exactly. Our mission is simply to notice the patterns. We're looking at the foundational structures that allow people to simply keep going day after day, year after year, under this continuous pressure of everyday life. It's an exploration of the mechanism of sustained effort that, it completely avoids the loud, performance-driven narratives that dominate so much of our discussion today.
Yeah. And we've synthesized the conversation into 4 interlocking areas for our analysis today. First, we have to define the burden itself. We have to talk about the components of this chronic weight, what the source calls responsibility, pressure, and expectations, and how the sheer duration of carrying them builds this very specific type of strength. Then second, we'll dissect what the source identifies as the invisibility paradox.
Oh, that's a great name for it.
It is, isn't it? It's all about why the most pervasive common form of strength goes completely uncelebrated, why it often remains unseen even by the people who benefit from it the most. Third, we're going to analyze the deliberate frame of contrast the source establishes. This is key. It distinguishes this quiet strength from hustle, dominance, and even resilience training.
Okay, and that's a big one. And finally,
we'll examine the source's unusual methodology itself, why this constraint of remaining conversational, observational, and ending without a neat conclusion is so critical to actually understanding quiet endurance.
we are here to notice the architecture. And in doing so, we have to mirror that reflective, grounded mood throughout our own conversation. Okay, let's unpack this approach by starting right at the foundation. To really get into this, we have to grasp the core concept from the source material, and it's this. This strength is built only by carrying responsibility, pressure, and expectations, and this is the important part, over time.
Yes.
The strength is a function of duration, not intensity.
That is such a crucial pivot point away from, our traditional definitions of strength, whether it's physical or mental. When we talk about strength, we usually visualize a peak moment, this high-intensity, explosive event.
Like a sprint, or lifting something in an emergency.
Exactly. The sprint, the emergency lift, the massive adaptation you have to make to some kind of acute trauma. That kind of strength is absolutely essential for survival, but it is not what we are discussing here. This is a different animal entirely.
I think the most important distinction in the source material is the one between acute pressure and chronic weight. Acute pressure, that's the deadline, right?
Yep.
The singular crisis, the unexpected surge of demand.
Right, the thing with a clear beginning and a clear end.
Yes. And the strength you get from that is from the successful immediate reaction, the rapid consumption of energy to solve a short-term problem. It gives you an immediate, very visible payoff. You feel it. Everyone sees it.
But chronic weight, that operates so differently. It's the sustained, almost low-level exertion that just defines functional adult life. It's this persistent force that never quite lets up. The analogy I kept thinking of is holding a very heavy textbook for 10 seconds versus holding a moderate but really awkward parcel for 8 hours straight.
Oh, that's a great image.
The initial effort for the textbook is immense, right? But it's over quickly. The strength required for that parcel, that is pure, unwavering endurance. It's built by constantly resisting the desire to just set it down.
That sustained holding is the architecture. That's the whole thing. It means that the strength isn't built in the moment you first pick it up, but in the relentless day in, day out commitment to just maintaining that position, even when fatigue is screaming at you. It's about longevity over any kind of immediate output.
And that's where the architectural metaphor becomes so useful. If you build a skyscraper, the acute pressure is, say, a sudden, unexpected seismic event it has to survive.
Okay.
But the quiet endurance, That's the constant chronic weight of the materials themselves, the gravitational pull, the wind load, just the sheer necessity of the structure remaining upright every second of every day. For a century, the structure is constantly under stress, yet its defining feature is its stability.
So let's spend some time on those three forces the source identifies. The components of this chronic weight: responsibility, pressure, and expectations. Because they don't just exist on their own, right? Their interaction is what really tests this endurance.
That's right. Responsibility is the main structural load-bearing beam. It is the obligation, the duty that one accepts, whether it's to provide shelter, care for dependents, manage a professional team, or, simply adhere to your own personal code of conduct. It's the commitment you can't default on without severe consequences.
And the moment you have that responsibility, it introduces pressure. Is that right? Pressure is the external force.
Yes, the external or sometimes environmental force that's exerted because of that responsibility. So if you take on the responsibility for your family's financial solvency, the pressure comes from inflation, market instability, and unexpected car repair. It's the load that's constantly being applied to the beam, just pushing down always.
Okay, so you have the beam, which is responsibility, and the weight on top of it, which is pressure.
Yeah.
What about expectations? Where do they fit in?
Well, then we layer in expectations. These are the standards, and they can be internal or external, applied to how that responsibility is supposed to be managed under all that pressure. This is the ideal design, the blueprint.
I see.
So if you are responsible for maintaining a healthy relationship while you're under, say, huge economic pressure, the expectation might be that you also remain cheerful and supportive and appear totally unburdened by the stress.
That's where the system becomes truly complex and, frankly, almost impossible. Because the expectations often demand a level of performance that just completely contradicts the reality of the pressure you're feeling.
Exactly.
So the quiet strength required here isn't just about managing the physical weight, the responsibility plus the pressure, but also managing the emotional or mental weight of meeting an often unrealistic standard, the expectations, while you're doing it.
The sustained combination of those three elements is the architecture. When the commitment, the responsibility, is relentlessly tested by external factors, the pressure, and then constantly measured against a high standard, the expectations, and that whole situation is prolonged indefinitely, that's when you create the conditions for quiet endurance to develop. It's the complete internalization of the entire load.
What's fascinating here is how the source talks about the nature of carrying. It just necessitates this fundamental shift in your whole perspective. To carry something implies constant exertion, physical or mental. And crucially, you don't have the option of setting the load down permanently.
No, you
You
don't.
might shift the load, right? You might redistribute the weight for a second to find these little moments of micro relief. But that underlying commitment, that beam of responsibility, it remains.
A person carrying this kind of weight has to prioritize persistent function over any kind of temporary comfort. They just have to. If your responsibility is to maintain the health and safety of others, you literally cannot afford a catastrophic failure. So the focus shifts entirely to maintenance, to stability, to longevity, the temporary rush of excitement or achievement. It becomes irrelevant compared to the steady, unyielding requirement to simply function again tomorrow and the day after that.
So if we look for grounded observations of this, as the source suggests, we're not talking about grand gestures or heroic feats. We're talking about the thousands of small, steady decisions that prevent structural collapse in common everyday life.
Think about the parent who meticulously plans the weekly schedule. They're handling all these unseen logistics, like coordinating appointments, restocking supplies, doing maintenance checks that literally no one else even knows are happening.
Or the middle manager who consistently runs interference between the demands from upper management and their team's actual capabilities. They were just silently absorbing pressure from both sides to ensure the team stays stable.
These are not tasks that earn you a parade. Not even a thank you most of the time. They are the consistent application of effort, the steady routine, the consistent showing up, the preventative maintenance of these incredibly complex systems. The strength required is immense precisely because it is never allowed to fully slacken. It's fueled by commitment and obligation, not by adrenaline or the promise of a finish line.
And this commitment, this structural stability, is what leads us directly into the great paradox you mentioned earlier.
Yes. The quieter and steadier that architecture becomes, the more likely it is to be completely, utterly overlooked.
Okay, section 2. This dives into the invisibility paradox. Source notes that this strength is often invisible and involves people moving through life holding weight without announcing it. I mean, if quiet endurance is the bedrock of a functional society, Why is it so utterly unseen?
Well, it's invisible precisely because of its success. True quiet endurance, it lacks the dramatic peak, It doesn't have an audible struggle or some public display that we normally associate with a celebrated achievement.
Right. There's no big moment.
There is no big moment. Success in this realm is defined by the absence of failure. It's the continuity of function. It's the steady baseline, the maintained equilibrium, which generates no noise, and therefore it gets no recognition.
It's like we celebrate the repair, but not the prevention. We celebrate the person who comes in and fixes the sudden crisis, but we completely ignore the person whose daily vigilance ensured that 10 potential crises never even materialized in the first place.
The source points directly to the mechanism of this invisibility. It's the absence of announcement. The structure holds silently. If you absorb the chronic pressure internally and you manage it seamlessly, you appear effortless. And we, as observers, we make a huge mistake. We confuse that appearance of effortlessness with an actual lack of effort.
That's a profound point. The strength, then, lies in part in the self-sufficiency of the person carrying it. They absorb the pressure and they process it without needing external validation or relief or recognition. The moment you announce the weight, the quiet aspect of the endurance is compromised.
It is. Seeking relief or validation, which is completely human and necessary for emotional balance, don't get me wrong, but it moves the action into the realm of external performance. The purest form of quiet endurance, as it's described here, is measured by the silence that surrounds the exertion. It's the constant internal maintenance that only the bearer is ever truly aware of.
And this brings us to the three mechanisms the source says are constantly required to maintain this silence, but are, rarely celebrated. Endurance, patience, and restraint.
Right. Let's start with endurance. In this context, it's not just survival. It's not just getting through. It's sustained, effective action in the face of deep physical or emotional fatigue.
It's the ability to keep doing the necessary routine, the budgeting, the logistics, the emotional availability on day 3,000, even when your energy tank has been running on fumes since day 300.
Exactly. It's the functional capacity that persists long after motivation has completely evaporated. The motivation is gone, but the function remains.
And patience is the stabilizing mortar in all this. Quiet endurance involves these long, slow processes. The years it takes to pay off a mortgage, the decade it takes to nurture a child into independence, the slow, incremental work of maintaining a complex organization. Impatience would just destroy the architecture.
It would. It would force these premature, unsustainable bursts of energy, or you'd seek these immediate false resolutions. Patience is the deliberate capacity to defer an action or an outcome. It resists the contemporary urgency that demands instant metrics and immediate payoffs. It is the quiet knowledge that the true measure of your success will only be visible much, much later. Or maybe never.
But I have to agree with the source here. Restraint is perhaps the most intriguing mechanism. And it's the one that seems to demand the most active energy. The force describes restraint as the deliberate choice not to exhibit the pressure being felt.
And restraint is an intensely active form of strength. This is not passive suppression. It is energy that is actively spent holding back, maintaining composure, choosing silence, or providing calm reassurance when every single fiber of your being is signaling distress or panic.
It's an internal dampening system.
What's a perfect way to put it? It prevents the transmission of stress to the external environment.
We really need to spend some time exploring the energy cost of that restraint. Because when you're under chronic pressure, let's say financial strain or relational strain, the natural reactive urge is often anger or fear or withdrawal.
Of course.
So restraint is the constant active decision to override that immediate reaction for the sake of stability and continuity for other people.
Consider a professional setting, the immense effort required by a leader to walk into a really volatile meeting, maintain a perfectly level, grounded tone, and just absorb the chaos without reflecting it back onto their team. Or, on a domestic scale, the energy you spend to swallow a sharp retort during a stressful interaction with a dependent, or just to present a calm face when you're privately navigating a personal crisis. That effort is a continuous, invisible tax on the person carrying it.
That reframes restraint completely. It's often dismissed as, lack of emotion or being cold, but this frames it as a massive expenditure of self-control. The individual isn't ignoring the pressure. They're actively diverting the energy of that pressure inward so it manifests as composure on the outside, not external chaos.
The ability to manage your internal state without externalizing conflict or panic, That is the working definition of this quiet strength.
And because that effort is invisible, it's so often profoundly misread by observers. The person exhibiting perfect restraint might get labeled cold or unfeeling or even effortless.
Yes, effortless. The observer just fails to see the enormous internal processing that's required to maintain that placid surface while under an incredibly high load.
So now we have to look at the celebration gap this creates. Our culture celebrates speed, visible victory, rapid adaptation, immediate gain. Why are patience and restraint, the very qualities that keep our systems, our societies, our families stable, so rarely given any attention or praise?
Well, the lack of celebration, it stems from a deep societal bias toward visible metrics of success. We love the dramatic resolution, we love the heroic outcome, the quantifiable profit margin. We overlook the foundational, non-performative work that's required simply to maintain stability.
It's like the culture is addicted to narrative arcs.
Yes. It's addicted to stories that involve conflict and climax, whereas quiet endurance is characterized by a flat line, a continuous, successful, but ultimately undramatic baseline.
It's the difference between celebrating the invention of a new life-saving medicine and celebrating the ongoing maintenance of the sanitation infrastructure that prevents the diseases from ever happening in the first place.
A perfect analogy. Both are absolutely essential, but only one provides that spectacular visible payoff that's required for celebration.
And this gap just reinforces the invisibility. Because stability is the expected default state, the effort that's required to maintain it just goes unnoticed.
Quiet endurance is measured by the lack of incident. And, famously, no news is no story. If the structure is holding perfectly, there is nothing to talk about, nothing to praise, and nothing to reward. The strength, in the end, remains its own reward, known only to the person carrying it.
Okay, one of the most insightful parts of this source material, I think, is its very deliberate attempt to define quiet endurance by what it is not. The architecture is framed in opposition to these pervasive contemporary concepts. It explicitly excludes hustle, dominance, and resilience training.
This section is absolutely critical because it prevents the listener you from just slipping this concept into a pre-existing motivational category you already have in your head. Quiet strength is fundamentally non-performative. It's focused on necessary maintenance, not ambitious acquisition.
Let's start with hustle. The source just rejects this framing completely. Hustle implies this frantic, high-energy, high-visibility activity that's geared toward rapid accumulation or immediate gain. It's inherently restless, aggressive toward the clock.
And it often requires a public performance of busyness.
Yes, the whole grind-set culture that celebrates burning the candle at both ends.
Quiet endurance is the methodological opposite of that. It is steady, potentially even slow, and it's focused on maintaining structural integrity rather than maximizing output or acquisition. Where hustle seeks to expand influence rapidly, quiet endurance just prioritizes longevity and stability.
That's a different time horizon, isn't it?
A completely different time horizon. The person driven by hustle is constantly looking for the next external peak to conquer. They're driven by short-term metrics of success and the validation that comes from visible accomplishment. The person exhibiting quiet endurance is simply focused on ensuring the interior structures do not fail under continuous pressure. They're thinking in terms of years or even decades, not quarters or sprints.
And that requirement for public announcement is a core differentiator. Hustle almost necessitates the performance of effort to validate the activity.
Yeah.
Posting about your early mornings, celebrating the small wins publicly.
Whereas the quiet strength described here is utterly unconcerned with external appearance. The strength is in the being, the fundamental structural integrity, not in the doing for an external show.
The motivation is different.
The motivation is entirely different. Hustle is often driven by an ambition for rapid change or extrinsic recognition, the outcome. Quiet endurance is driven by the intrinsic necessity of carrying the burden, the commitment to responsibility. One is focused on becoming bigger, or faster, or louder. The other is focused on remaining stable, true, and functional. It's the difference between trying to scale a wall and just maintaining the ground beneath your feet.
Okay, next, the rejection of dominance. This is a big one. In our culture, strength is so often associated with competitive superiority or control over other people or external situations. It's about winning the interaction, mastering the entire environment.
And quiet endurance is a profound internal management system that accepts the limits of external control. A person exhibiting this quiet strength might accept an inherently difficult or unfavorable situation, one they cannot possibly dominate or win, and they can still demonstrate strength by maintaining their internal commitment, their composure, and their required function within those rigid constraints.
That is a fundamental redefinition of strength, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
strength is defined here by internal fortitude and the ethical management of the self, rather than by external victory or competitive triumph.
It is. You can lose a battle, you can fail a major external goal, and yet you can still demonstrate immense quiet endurance by how you manage the internal fallout without structural collapse.
So if you're exhibiting dominance, you're trying to change the environment to suit your goals.
Right. But if you're exhibiting quiet endurance, you are managing your internal state so you can function within the environment as it already exists. This requires a level of acceptance and grounded realism that competitive dominance just often rejects at her hand.
And finally, the dismissal of resilience training. This is fascinating to me because resilience is so often used interchangeably with endurance. Why does the source make such a strict distinction?
Well, resilience training suggests a reactive, programmatic approach. It implies a process. A stressor hits, the structure bends, and then the structure is intentionally trained to spring back faster or to adapt. It's a skill set that's applied after the stress hits. It's an intervention that's based on the expectation of failure.
But quiet endurance, as it's described here, seems to be the inherent constant state, the underlying steady capacity that prevents the structure from needing a reactive training moment in the first place. It is the preemptive structural stability.
Precisely. It's the difference between practicing how to survive a major earthquake, that's resilience training, and building a home with a foundation that's so strong the earthquake barely registers as anything more than a significant shake. Quiet endurance is the sturdy foundation.
So if you're consistently carrying the chronic weight, you are constantly exercising this quiet strength. It becomes an intrinsic state of being, not a skill you only practice when stress demands it.
The person practicing quiet endurance doesn't wait for a crisis to practice bouncing back. They're structured in such a way that the bounce-back mechanism is constantly engaged just to maintain the baseline.
And this emphasis on internal constant effort. It brings us back to the source's prescribed mood for this whole discussion. The conversation and the strength itself must remain reflective and grounded.
Yes, this type of strength demands looking inward and just acknowledging the reality of the burden, rather than projecting an image of effortless coping or rapid adaptation.
So if we contrast the internal experience with the external observation, for the person carrying it, it is constant, low-grade, inescapable physical or mental exertion. It's often just internalized as life or being an adult.
While for the observer, it's just reliability, stability, predictability. The observer sees a steady figure who appears to handle everything effortlessly. And this gap, the effortless appearance masking relentless internal effort, that is the essence of the invisibility paradox. And it makes the strength profoundly lonely to carry because the true effort is never really seen.
So now we step back and we analyze the structure of the source material itself. The instruction we were given is to be conversational, observational, and to let it drift naturally and end without wrapping things up. Now, for deep dive like ours, this directive to avoid a clean conclusion or a set of takeaways it's highly counterintuitive.
It is the final brilliant stroke of the architecture of the source itself. It raises the critical question. What is the benefit of deep observation if there's no prescribed conclusion? Why spend all this time dissecting the patterns of strength if we aren't going to offer you, the listener, a path forward, a how-to, or a call to action?
Usually, the listener you is expecting the actionable steps. That's why people tune in. By deliberately removing advice or any kind of motivational urgency, the conversation forces you to just engage critically with the patterns we've presented. It forces reflection rather than reaction.
Exactly.
Okay.
If we simply said, okay, you need to carry chronic weight quietly, the natural tendency is to ask, how do I optimize that? What are the 3 steps to better quiet endurance? By refusing to answer that question, we respect the fundamental complexity of the observed pattern.
We're suggesting that this isn't a simple skill to be acquired.
No, it's a state of being that's developed through years of commitment and sheer necessity. It is the product of the architecture, not the blueprint for building it instantly.
If we connect this constraint to the bigger picture, this non-conclusion, it maintains that grounded, steady mood that's established in the source material. Adding motivational urgency or high-stakes promises or guaranteed solutions would just fundamentally violate the solid, quiet, grounded, present tone that's required to even discuss the subject matter properly.
And a lack of advice keeps the conversation focused on the present reality of the effort. We're observing the structure as it stands, acknowledging its difficulty and its functional necessity, rather than suggesting it needs immediate, aggressive modification to be better. The strength is acknowledged for what it is, not for what it could be.
So what does this observational stance mean for you, the listener? It means we're simply noticing this architectural reality. We're allowing the insight, the recognition of the chronic load, to just settle without the immediate demand for application. We've simply documented the phenomena.
It's like two people watching a complex machine function perfectly. They're just sharing the observation and appreciating the immense, unseen forces at work that allow it to keep running.
And that understated tone the source required of us, it directly mirrors the subject matter. The discussion style itself is meant to embody the quiet endurance being discussed. If this analysis was conducted with, frantic urgency or a loud celebratory rhetoric, it would completely contradict the very nature of the strength we're observing.
The silence of the observation must match the silence of the endurance.
The goal, then, is for this whole conversation to feel like a shared moment of profound recognition about a mundane fact of life. We're appreciating the difficulty that's inherent in stability. We're acknowledging that the most impressive feat of strength for so many people is simply maintaining equilibrium, day after day, in silence, without a definitive endpoint in sight.
It's the observation that the structure is holding, and that the continued holding, the capacity to remain functional under sustained invisible pressure, is the truest definition of this quiet strength.
It's a deep and often overlooked insight.
And that often is enough.
This has been a deeply reflective and expansive deep dive into the architecture of quiet endurance, an exploration of the strength that sustains the everyday. We have analyzed the sustained chronic nature of the weight, the responsibility, the pressure, and the expectations, and we've explored the immense energy costs of mechanisms like restraint and patience that contribute to the invisibility of this strength. We have also defined this architecture by what it rejects, contrasting its steady commitment with the loud demands of hustle and the reactive nature of resilience training.
The strength, in the end, is in the sustained effort. It's in the uncelebrated requirements and the profound internal management that's required to maintain structural integrity when the world demands visibility and speed. We've analyzed the structure, we've acknowledged the burden, and we've stepped away from offering solutions respecting the reflective and grounded nature of the source material. As you move through your environment today, let this observation just settle in. Consider where in your own immediate environment the evidence of quiet endurance is most visible, precisely because it is never mentioned, never praised, and never acknowledged. Look for the consistent, steady functionality, the person, the routine, the system that is so reliable you cease to even notice it. The strength that simply allows the world around it to function predictably. That quiet, unyielding effort, that persistent presence, that is the architecture in operation.
That is a powerful and humbling thought to carry forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. This grounded discussion was brought to you by Coffee Cup's Toro Blend, crafted specifically for those moments when you need grounded, steady focus that lasts, not just a frantic jolt. We appreciate you sharing your sources with us.